2 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defenses I would start this week. The first defense is the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns in week 1 obviously got a tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs, where they gave up 33 points, had 2 sacks, but lost that ball game anyway, 33-29. But here in week 2, they got a better matchup versus the Houston Texans, even though the Houston Texans had a great week 1, but that was the Jacksonville Jaguars. Cleveland, they're going to be home in this one, and I think they're going to get to the quarterback early and often right here. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to survive this Brown pass defensive brush here with Jadeveon Clowney, Malik Jackson, obviously, and Myles Garrett. So that's a pretty good front four over there for this Brown team. And week 1 was a tough matchup, but here in week 2, I think they get things in gear, and I think they possibly find the end zone as well on an interception or a fumble recovery for a touchdown. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to match what he did in week 1, and this Brown defense is pretty legit in my opinion here. Just week 1 was a bad matchup. The next defense I would look to start this week is the New England Patriots. So the Patriots in week 1 had a pretty decent fantasy day in terms of only giving up 17 points to the Miami Dolphins with 2 sacks and an interception. But here in week 2, they got a good matchup at the New York Jets, where they usually put in work no matter who the Jets quarterback is. And as long as Belichick's running this defense, they just have the Jets' number, is this New England Patriot defense, no matter the names, no matter the players. And I think this week they're going to get to the quarterback, Zach Wilson, and make a few plays on him in this one. And the Patriots defense, they're still pretty good as a unit, like I mentioned. They held down the Miami Dolphins to 17 points, and they just couldn't get enough turnovers or sacks. But I think in this game versus the New York Jets, they're good for 2 or 3 turnovers in this one, and 4 or 5 sacks in my opinion. So I like the Patriots defense a lot, and I think this could be a low scoring type of ball game once again here, but go fire up the Patriots as a defense to start this week. The next defense is the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills in week 1 played a decent defensive game for fantasy football. I know it was a pretty tough matchup versus a pretty solid Pittsburgh Steelers offense, but they held the Steelers down most of that ball game, was the Buffalo Bills. And here week 2, they were in the division ball game at the Miami Dolphins, and I think they could get to Tua Tagovailoa, and they could make a few plays on him in my opinion here. Tua, he didn't look all that great, and in week 1 he had 23 points they gave up to the Steelers, 2 sacks. So right here I think they'll get more sacks. I think they could get a few turnovers in this game as Buffalo, and I think they had a good start this week at the defensive position. The next defense I look to start is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs in week 1, they had a good shootout with the Dallas Cowboys, but they outlasted them, winning the ball game 31-29, and they only had 2 fantasy points. Dak Prescott couldn't be stopped in that game. 1 sack and interception and 29 points given up. But here in week 2, it's a much better matchup for this Buc defense, where Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons come into town. And in week 1, Matt Ryan and the Falcons, they only generated 6 points without even scoring a touchdown in that game. So right here, I think Tampa Bay is going to tee off. And once Tampa Bay gets up to an early lead, they're going to make this offense one-dimensional over there in Atlanta, like the Philadelphia Eagles did. And that's where they could really get some sacks. That's where they could get a few turnovers. And I think the game script is going to go in this ball game. And that's how I think the Tampa Bay Bucs are going to have a good defensive performance, making Matt Ryan try to beat him and play catch-up football. And that's where quarterbacks usually get in trouble. And I see Tampa Bay taking advantage of that. So they're definitely worth a start. In the 5th and final defense, I look to start this week's the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos had a pretty good outing in week 1 versus the New York Giants. I know the Giants, their top playmakers weren't all 100% in Saquon Barkley and Kenny Galladay, but hey, the Broncos still went out there and they played a good ball game, no doubt about it in that one. 13 points allowed only, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery, and 2 4th down stops if you play 4th down stops in your fantasy league. So right here, that last touchdown by Daniel Jones and the Giants was a garbage time touchdown where they were just playing prevent and making the clock roll. Here was Denver. And here in week 2, they got a pretty decent matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know Trevor Lawrence, he looked pretty decent in his week 1 performance, but they were getting blown out in that ball game where they had to throw a ball a lot. But if this game's a little bit tighter, I think Von Miller and this defensive unit, they're going to make a few plays and try to get to the number 1 pick rookie quarterback in Lawrence. So I like the Broncos this week. They're a pretty stout defense, and they could ball hawk to the ball. So that's a few defenses I would start here in week 2 of the fantasy football season.